Today our session is about the Allies Toolkit, which we launched last month. This session will bring it to life. On the Allies Toolkit, if you haven't seen it already, it's at www.investinginethnicity.com, ethnicity allies. And you'll see a toolkit, which a lot of organizations have circulated to their entire organization. And also we've got a few videos as well on being an ethnicity ally and microaggressions as well. So what I wanted to do is firstly just introduce us to our speakers today. We have Abby Jones, who's Senior Vice President for Moody's. Hi, Abby. And Ileana Sodani. Hi, Ileana. Thank you for joining us. She's Global Co-Head of Asset Servicing and Sales at BNY Mellon. Just to introduce yourself, just a bit about what you do, but also a bit about your organization, and tell us a bit about how you've been, the changes around the ethnicity agenda at the moment, currently. If Ileana, if you start.
Well, am I going to start? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. And I think that the toolkit is an amazing toolkit, so everyone should read through it. A lot of work went into it, and I've actually already used it because I got a preview of it. So I just wanted to give you a shout out. So very, very informative. So at BNY Mellon, diversity and ethnicity has always been a focus of the company through our various resource groups, and of course, of late, even more so. And a lot of attention is being given at the senior levels, from the CEO to our global head of HR, who wrote an article about doubling down on diversity, and our whole entire executive committee, which I know have put a lot of time into looking at exactly what we need to do on a global basis and how we can actually drive and execute. And the big word for us right now, after this, these months, is about execution. We've been talking about it, but now as a company, as individuals, and as leaders, what are we actually doing about it? And a few things. I mean, we have a D&I library and a toolkit as well. We are actually making unconscious bias training mandatory, and we have done it in the past. This is not a new thing. So we have, as a company, embedded it into our culture. We're looking at the pipeline of the future. So both internally, how do we develop individuals from a diversity front internally, but also externally from the communities, and how are we reaching out, and how are we going to universities and communities with ethnicity and diversity and diverse communities versus typical universities with a diversity program. We really want to really invest in the communities that are going to give chances to individuals that might not necessarily have those chances. As usual, something always happens, so that's it.
We always need one.
We are doing reporting here in the UK on the ethnicity gaps, so we really want to start being more transparent as an organization. We run digital cafes, which are safe havens, where people can actually speak and feel that it's safe, that they can express their opinion. And I guess the other thing that you had asked me to mention is, what are we doing around Black History Month? And I really want Black history, or we do, and this is part of Impact, which is our diversity and ethnicity group. We really want to celebrate Black history. So we're trying to figure out, are there individuals can actually talk about what's special to them, so that people learn and are educated about Black history, and it should be a celebration. And that's what I want to make it, something very exciting and happy that people can really learn and understand more. And it's all about education at the end of the day.
Fantastic. And you were also on our top 10 champions list for the Ethnicity Awards, a little plug there, previously. And Abby, what sort of stuff is Moody doing, planning as well?
Hi, I'm Abby, SVP at Moody's, and I guess we're doing sort of similar things to what Ileana's talking about. So looking at initiatives that are helping to bring the story to the forefront. And it's not just bringing the story to the forefront and talking about it, it's actually doing something. So it's not just to say, to do. okay, what do we say? We can say so many things and put so many papers out and do a lot of interviews around stuff. But if we're not doing anything and we're not taking any action, then all of that is lost. And within a few months or a year, something else comes up that takes the forefront. One of the big things that we did around the very unfortunate incident that happened earlier in the year with George Floyd is that, and I have to say, I was very surprised myself that our CEO came out and said, and actually put something else about that, and that, about how angered and saddened he was by it, and the fact that something needs to happen. So we were doing a lot around diversity before. We were doing a lot around diversity across all fronts, but it was a case of something more needs to happen. This shows that we're not doing enough, and there's more that needs to happen. We have various groups, employee research groups across the companies that are making sure that the various strands of diversity are being spoken about and are being acted upon. What can we do to make things better? What can we do to make the place more comfortable for everyone to work in? How can we make it a more comfortable environment? So one of the things that they've done is looked at it from the top down. A lot of what happens when things like this happen is they say, okay, we send out an email to the business saying you guys need to do better, unconscious bias, all these other bits and pieces, which are just as important. But it's also looking at what needs to happen from the top down, from the senior executive level, from the company board of directors, from that level to the ground floor. And that's what we're looking at. So from now on, we're going to be looking at diversity training from the top down as mandatory. It's not just a when you have time to do it. It's a you must do it, and it must be reflected in your performance as an employee of the company. So it's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have as an employee of the company. It's something we're also looking at in terms of our recruitment. It's something we're looking at in terms of our corporate social responsibility. How much more can we do in that space to build visibility around the fact that being racist, being sexist, being any type of ism that isn't the right ism is wrong.
Yeah,
Engaging in that is very wrong.
That's really good to hear, and it's really great to hear what organisations are doing, like especially due to what's happened recently, that sort of there seems to be more activity and more people listening at the moment. So just regarding the allies part, it's a bit of a minefield. Some people have said, you know, trying to navigate it. We've got a quick poll for everyone, and see how many of you are active out there. So the question is, do you think people are confused by what constitutes racism at work? There's also the opportunity to put your comments if you're unsure about it in the chat box as well. And also, like, you know, the chat box is a real opportunity to like have those conversations as well, like, and answer each other's questions. So we'll just give this a couple of seconds. Like, we're going to give you 3 seconds left to do it. So anyone who hasn't voted, this is your chance. Okay, we're in the poll now. We have 64% saying yes, so 2/3, and 14% say no. They don't think people are confused about racism, and 22 people say depends. Just some of the comments in the chat, we've got a couple there. We've got one comment that's saying, I think the individuals like to pretend they are confused in order to get away with it. And people don't seem, we've both got, I don't think people are necessarily confused, just ignorant. So that's interesting. And you know what? I think it's about keeping it simple and asking yourself if, you know, sometimes if you're on the grounds of race, are you being discriminatory, or how is it affecting the other person? It's as simple as that. Sometimes it's not that complicated. So what I want you to do is just go on to the next slide, because this is a really useful slide that we've been using for a lot of our areas to bring it to life about what racism means in the workplace. And I'm just going to quickly touch on it. Basically, it looks at the macro and the micro side of racism. Essentially, we've heard about systemic racism and how history and that side of it all sort of filters into the top level. Essentially, systemic racism is if there wasn't a population there by design, this form of racism would still exist. And then interestingly, on the macro side, so when we look at it, the areas that, not personal to us, there's the institutional side, which in a workplace environment looks at things like policies, practices. So some examples, and I'm kind of urge you to put some examples as well that you might think of into the chat, and I'll explain to you why we're bringing all this part of it up. But you can think of things like recruitment practices maybe, and best practice policies and stuff within the workplace. Interestingly, other areas of racism look at the micro side. So we're looking at the micro side. A lot of you have heard of unconscious bias, and you may have had training, and that's our internalized biases that we have, and everyone has them. It's essentially partly through society, media, and all those things that filter through. We've all got various biases, and some of them have negative effects on different minority groups. And then there's the interpersonal, which is really like quite a big topic area when it comes to racism in the workplace. And it's really how biases can manifest themselves as racist acts and microaggressions, which is really subtle, covert, everyday racism, which can, really create like a negative culture within the workplace. But what I wanted to do, and what we were looking at, and what I wanted to do from this is, number one, look at think of all the areas within those sections that impact the workplace. And then if you think about it, all of those sections all have an influence on each other. So if you've got biases, and you influence policy because you're in a position of power, you will change and impact that, where policies can also impact your biases. So then your microaggression. So it's just showing you that actually it's like a cloud forming, and essentially all those different areas in the workplace all hinder like someone's lived experiences and their employee life cycle in the workplace, and it can become an everyday negative sort of experience. So that's what we're trying to do here today. We're trying to see how we unpick that a bit, and we focus on looking at all those areas. If we go on to the next slide, I wanted to ask our panelists, our speakers today, what do they feel are the biggest challenges in the workplace at the moment? And if I go to Abby first this time, what do you feel is happening within Moody's, especially with what's happened at the moment?
As I said, one of the big things that we've done is looked at how to address this from top down, rather than do it as a general chat to the company. And I think because of that, we're addressing one of the biggest challenges, which is usually from the top. In most companies, as you see with the leadership, as you see with the heads, as you see with the managing directors, whoever the big honchos are in the company, more often than not, they follow a particular their particular person and a particular color, for want of a better word, a particular color and a particular gender and a particular of a particular form. They don't really go into us wanting to have anybody. They don't really go into the form of wanting to have as diverse a nation as they claim it to be. What they keep talking about is, we have the people that are right to do what we want them to do. And it's not a case of becoming diverse, it's a case of getting the best people in the job. But the best people in the job are not necessarily just white men. The best people in the job are not just necessarily Black women. The best people in the job are not just necessarily Chinese men. It's not any of that. It's giving the best people across all types of diverse range the opportunity to lead. And I think until we start dealing with it more widely from the top down, that will continue to be the biggest challenge, because there's just as much as you can shift at the bottom. If you don't do it from the top, if you don't do it from the institutional perspective of things, there's not much else you can do. Even if you're, you have a manager who's very interested, who has very, very diverse views, but if it comes to nominating you to go and sit on a particular senior council, looking at the people that work there, they might decide that, oh, I'm sorry, because everybody else there is going to be a white male, or because everybody else there is going to be female, or because everybody else there is going to be Asian or black, or whatever the situation might be, not put you there for that particular reason. I've had a job interview where I went to a job interview. I used to work for a regulator, the financial regulator, before I went for a job interview. After job interview, my name is Abby Jones, and again, I'm Nigerian. I don't have a Nigerian accent on the phone. And going to the interview, you could see the look of shock on the PR company executive's face that I was black. And he looked at me and thought, oh, okay. I kind of thought maybe you would be he looked at me in a sense of, oh, I expected you to be different. He didn't say that until the end of the interview. It was meant to be a job in Brussels, and he said, I'm being very honest with you, and I don't know that you're going to be able to cope very well as a black woman working in Brussels. He was very, very blunt with me and said that. And that's him being honest. Exactly. Other people are not. They think that, and that's why you don't get the job. They don't say it. They say, oh, we'll get back to you, but they've already signed you off. You having a strong Nigerian name or strong traditional name already gets you signed off a lot of interviews, because that's your name, and that's the mindset around
totally
it.
agree with you. There's something needs to change around sort of biases around recruitment processes, but also what you said around from the top, it's about role modelling that allyship behaviour as well, because if you're not doing it at the top, it's not role modelling the behaviour to line managers and areas wherever we need it. Ileana, just regarding your point of view, what do you think are like the biggest challenges? Because it's a way we can see how what we need to sort of overcome and do it together, maybe.
So I agree with Abby regarding leadership at the top. I just want to, there was an Oxford study that was done recently, and 24% of the individuals with a Western background actually got a callback versus 15% with a minority ethnic background. So it really plays into what you're saying. So I agree. If you really don't have the buy-in from the top, and actually the funding and the champions at the top of the house, then it's really not going to work through the middle management. It's really, really important that you have to lead by example. And all of our executive committee members at the top of the house are all responsible in some way or another for one of the resource groups, be it our women's group or our VetNet group, etc., or Impact, which does deal with ethnicity. I think the issues are twofold. One, it's actually the unconscious bias, absolutely agree with, and it gets back to the systemic issues, and I think it's also generational. That's part of the problem as well. And if you keep hiring in your own image or in your own thought, you're never going to get over the systemic, because then you have the same individuals supporting the same policies and the same ways of doing things. So you really need to bring other people into the senior levels. And we're doing that also through, we've actually brought in a new talent mapping system. So we're actually going to be having blind CVs. So that's going to actually eliminate some of that unconscious bias as well, in terms of bringing the right individuals in. And we're really making it also, HR has to take responsibility to make sure that whenever there is a position, especially of a seniority, that you are looking at it at diverse candidates across the board. And then what I said earlier is you really need to bring in the future leaders, and you have to create that pipeline of the future leaders. So management level and also the lower levels, you have to actually make an effort to go and bring individuals in that actually going to change the mindset and create a different environment for the future and really push. And that's going to be key. The environment today, unfortunately, like we want to do all these things, and it gets back to execution, but we're in the COVID environment. There's a lot of challenges financially, etc., and probably not as many opportunities to bring people in as you would have in a normal environment. But we still have to do the best we can to bring that forward and make sure that we are considering every talent at every spectrum. I think one of the other challenges we had in the beginning, which was quite frustrating to me and to my colleagues here in Europe, is it was really US focused. And we had to do a lot of education. And I remember one of the first panels I was on for our global business. And it was me with 3 colleagues who were all New York based. And I was the one actually telling people racism exists outside the US and it is very, very alive and apparent here in the UK. You'll find it in Germany, you'll find it all over Europe, and it can't be ignored, and it can't, and we have to be at the table, and we have to make sure that we are making the changes globally and taking into consideration the different types of racism that exist. So there are different types that occur throughout our organization, and hearing the stories. And you talk about white privilege, and I know you're going to get to it later, but having the conversations, I've been, it's amazing how much I've learned. Colleagues of mine that before they go in Germany, before they go on holiday, they have to actually check if certain minorities are allowed at the resort, or if they're going to receive racist remarks, and that's how they choose where they go on holiday. Just things we don't think about or live every day. So I know I got a little bit off track, but those are the 2 big challenges, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. Definitely, we're getting some messages in the chat around, it is quite difficult to maintain working relationships, for instance, while people clearly have racial biases that perpetuate that collectively. And also, like, there's a bit of feedback around, there might be some confusion around microaggressions, and unconscious bias. So unless we really get to the bottom of actually what is racism in the workplace, how can we solve it? And a lot of people haven't taken the time to do that, but also it's about making it sort of quite clear, that it exists. Anyone that says it doesn't needs to relook at that, really. So on to the next slide, we have another poll for you. This one's an interesting one. Is, do you think being an ethnicity ally is different to being an ally within other diversity strands? And what I wanted to get you doing is thinking as well about maybe some of the nuances, because what we tend to do is say, look, let's just start a network group and get all our allies to join up, and that's it, job done. But I'd like to hear maybe some of the areas in the chat where you feel like this, I know it's 4 o'clock, but if you've got some ideas about where you think maybe, some of the requisites of being an ally within ethnicity and race, where that maybe differs to some of the other areas, or do you think that actually it's tougher? It'd be good to hear your opinions. So just another couple of seconds on that. 2, 1, and we're closing it now. So we have, do you think being an ethnicity race ally is different from other strands? We have 61% saying yes, 18% say no, and 20% say maybe depends. And in the chat, we've got maybe it's the different understanding you need to have for BAME, just like disability. So it's understanding the different needs. Being a minority is transferable. Understanding systemic racism is unique. I like that. That's quite good. And the history is different. So keep the chat going as well. So there's some really useful points coming out of that. On the next slide, I just wanted to ask a question back to our speakers. Sorry, I'm just moving this. How do you define being an ally yourself? Because everyone has various definitions just from what we've heard so far, and some of the issues raised. It's quite good to think how can we collectively as allies sort of challenge this and sort of actually maybe work together and in all of those different areas. And what do you think allies can do? If we go to Abby first,
Thanks, Sarah. I think with being an ally, as I flagged earlier on, is doing something. It's not just saying, it's doing. What can I do? it's great to say and announce and announce. The thing to do is, what can I do? What can I do about being an ally? How can I be an ally? And what actions can I take to make that happen? Understand that it's not just okay to feel bad about the fact that something happened. It's actually getting up and saying, okay, you know what, how can I drive change? Understanding what the issue is, learn more about the history, learn more about what it means. Think about the media that you get every day and what it's saying to you. I still walk past people every day who I still walk past people who clutch their bag just a little bit tighter as I walk past. This just from the fact that you're black. There are different things that happen. Again, it's not going to be the most comfortable place for you to be. So get used to that. Sit down. If you have friends that are, and again, it's not a case of you going around and saying, "Oh, I'm an ally because I have two black friends," or "I'm an ally because I have two Chinese friends," or "I'm an ally because I have two gay friends." It's not that. It's doing more than that. Understanding, sit with the discomfort, understand what the root causes are, understand what people are upset about, and then understand how you can step away from that. I remember joining a company, not going to name names, and someone said, "Oh, you're Nigerian. Oh, that means I can't give you my email address." Ha ha ha. And I was very offended by that. I didn't like the suggestion of the fact that because there was the whole thing about email addresses and Nigeria, that you thought that was a great joke. Well, they were probably not intentionally being horrible. That's what they were coming from. That's the angle they were coming from. It was not a nice thing to do. Be sensitive to what people are experiencing. This was going on, and while I don't think everybody around you, or every single person around you, everybody in the office needs to call you and say, "Oh, I hope you're okay," or check on you. But if you have friends, if you have colleagues that you're close to that would be affected by this, you can speak to them to understand what they're experiencing and understand what's happening to you. Think about what you can do from your own level, from your perspective. As I said, a big thing is looking at what's happening from top down. What is happening from top down? How can we address that? But from your own level, whatever level you are in the company, what can you do? How better can you understand? Black History Month is coming up. What does Black History Month mean? Where has it come from? What can you do in that space? What are the kind of things that will be celebrated? Get a better understanding about that. And once you do that and recognize that it's treating people with respect and doing everything you can to see that everyone around you is treated with respect, then you're more settled into the ally role. You're more settled into being an ally to any kind of diversity group you're linked to.
Mm-hmm. No, good point. And we've got someone on the chat as well who said they've shared similar experiences, so they can relate to that too. Regarding the chat, if you want to share your comments with the whole group, everyone on this call, then change from all panelists, and then basically everyone can join in your conversation. But if you don't, then put it on all panelists. Ileana, just regarding being an ally in the workplace, so practical tips, what is it that, what is it you feel that should represent, and what should an ally you do? What are the, easy wins and the things that are a bit more harder that they could be doing?
So, I mean, Abby said it very, very well. And I think first and foremost, as an ally, you shouldn't expect for people to inform you. You shouldn't be going to people and asking questions. As an ally, you should actually educate yourself. Mm-hmm. And there are so many books out there that are available that can educate yourself. I mean, why I'm no longer talking to white people about race is one example. So you really do, as an ally, you need to educate yourself. In your toolkit, you actually, I wrote down 3 important points. You need to recognize that you're in a privileged position. You have to recognize it's not about you. And you have to recognize, which I think Abby mentioned, that you have to challenge yourself. It is challenging. And as an ally, you shouldn't expect to be rewarded. It's not about being rewarded and being pointed out. As an ally, you have to use your position of privilege in no matter what situation. And privilege can have many different reasons, because many different there's reasons, many different, sorry. So it could be, you know, you're in a privileged position, or it could be that you're amongst friends and you're in a privileged position to actually call something out. And not only call it out, and it shouldn't be nasty, it should be coaching, it should be in a nice way. But then if the person starts to gaslight or starts to defend and deny, it's your responsibility actually to continue to call it out and make sure it doesn't get into a type of, you know, the Darvo type of situation. That's really, really important. The way I look at personally, I've written blogs, and I just wrote one that was published last week in our company, Death by 1,000 Cuts on Microaggressions. You know, my position, having a base to actually speak and call things out as a leader and actually call other leaders out, that's how I'm using my platform. And after putting that up, I got a lot of thank yous from people that I was bringing it to the forefront, bringing the conversation, and people started to express, which was quite amazing, you know, what they'd been through. And a lot of them also started thinking about that they had realized that they hadn't really thought about how they had been treated. So it made people actually take a step back and think about, wait a minute, people should not be saying that to me. That's not the right thing. And as allies, we really should be supporting that. And as I said, in my position, and I've always been that way, I've always been someone to push the envelope and really speak out. And be courageous, and it should be uncomfortable and it should be challenging, and I'm not afraid of it because it's the right thing to do, and I really don't support it any other way.
I think that's really interesting, especially all the workshops we do, like start from privilege, and I think we need to recognize that privilege isn't necessarily a bad thing. It actually is linked to your identity in all different areas, and it's quite transient as well compared to when it might be like in your home life versus your working life. But it's really useful that you brought that up, because that's how we actually become, like, recognize that to become an ally and how we use it. We're all on a learning curve as well, so it's great to hear, because the more people sort of who build up their own awareness and understanding, the more we can sort of help other people.
And there are people that are very afraid. They're afraid to have the conversation, right? So we have this toolkit. We ask managers to have these courageous conversations, get their teams together, and it's not happening in certain areas. And managers are really afraid, some of them, to have that conversation. And we just have to help them. We have to make sure it's open, because if they don't, then their staff is actually going to be resentful of that. And that's not the right environment we want. So we just have to help people to have that conversation and feel
and I think the other thing to say is don't put the pressure on that person, on the Black person or any of the ethnic minority to have that conversation with you.
Yes.
Don't say it's your responsibility to talk to me if something is going on. Yeah, they can talk to you, but you can also talk to them. There's no reason why you can't. The same way, if anybody was going through anything else, you would talk to them about it. If a team member, an employee came to you and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go to the hospital because of X, Y, and Z," you would want to know, okay, fine, how can we help you? Can we make sure you're, what's going on? Take care of yourself, rest up. It's the same thing. If something is going on that you think can affect them, then step out there, be the first light, do something first and be the light and say, listen, hi, I'm here for you. I'm here to talk to you about it. Let me know if you want to. A lot of managers are very, very, very hesitant to get involved. I think that's one of the things that they just think, I don't have to talk about. I don't have to. And you're very right. The difference between the US and Europe generally is the fact that they've thought, okay, it's a very different situation, different history, so it doesn't happen here. And if we just go with it doesn't happen here, then we don't need to address anything. And that has been the sense, especially in the UK.
Yeah, no, that's really
you're
useful.
absolutely spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really useful. And just on the fact of like not asking and like educating yourself, there is the Allies Toolkit, but also we've got a lot of resources on there as well. So different people like to learn differently. We've got various videos that are quite useful as well if you're not into reading. But there's recommended books as well. So lots of resources. So different ways to learn. There's no excuses. Just to go back to the toolkit, a big part of the toolkit is on the next slide, which is our checklist. So if you look at our toolkit, it's basically gives you loads of tools around what different, like a glossary of terms of what different things mean. So some of the things we mentioned, like privilege, bias, microaggressions. It also tells you how to call out some behaviours in an empathetic way, like so you get the best results. So it's not around naming and shaming. But what we have at the back is a really simple checklist. We come from the premise that if everyone goes into the workplace and changes their behaviours or like does something a bit differently on this checklist and like ticks off a few things and starts becoming mindful about certain things, then that's how, if everyone did that, we could change the culture of a workplace tomorrow. So essentially, just to read off some of the examples on here, there's the first slide is around awareness, and some of these things you might have already touched on, and we might have touched on this session. You might have been involved in some learning sessions within your workplace as well. So the first section is really on that. We urge you to like have a look, tick through it if there's other areas, but I would say this is a continuous journey. So I'm continuously learning about some things as well and trying to be aware. On the next slide and in the next page of the checklist, the next section is more around action and taking actions as an ally. Some of the key things we can do around that side. And what I've done is, like, for example, so around the awareness side, before we had, it touches on privilege and understanding that and understanding a bit more around some of the things we talked about. But this section looks at more around what you can do. And some of the points are really simple. For instance, if you encounter unfair practices, it's about sort of interrupting those behaviours, or even if you're in a meeting, well, nowadays it's a Zoom meeting or similar, about speaking about actively ensuring that all your colleagues actually get to speak in the meeting, because we're finding that actually marginalised communities and minority groups aren't. But there's like a whole list of like really useful tools in there. And then on the next section, we look more at, so what we sort of come from the premise of the beginning sections are the start of your journey, and everyone can easily, some of these points you can do so easily, but what we look at is like how you can become more of an advocate within this space, and that's about giving other support to other peer support to other allies, and going on the next sort of steps. But the final, once you've got this nailed and you're like there, the final section is more looking at how you can, especially particularly if you're in a position at the top, and it's like Abby mentioned, about actually starting to influence some of that more macro level change. So how you can influence the organization a little bit to change some of that, the racism that we've spoken about that happens on that sort of big level at the top. But we think that it's like, it looks like a big job. There's, it has massive impact on, as we've seen, but just by changing some of these things, like on all different levels, we can make great strides in changing things.
Yes,
so,
I agree. Thank you.
But yeah, it's just a start. So just to go on to our next part, just some quick things around the toolkit before we go back to our panelists. We've got a video on microaggressions. We're not going to have time to show it today, but what I would do is urge you, if you're like sort of, or actually send it to other members, because the fact you're on this call means that you're sort of interested in the topic area, but send it to other people within your team and within the organization. What it does is give different voices, like, to speak around what they've experienced microaggressions, and some of them are really subtle, so people wouldn't have even maybe thought about it until they sort of see the video. But do watch that in your own time. And the toolkit does have other examples as well. And what we've seen, just so we sort of touched on this, like some of these really covert microaggressions are so subtle. They have like quite a sustained effect in the long term on different people within the organisation from minority groups. I just wondered, just a chance for you to say in chat, like, what sort of things do you think sustained microaggressions? If you're experiencing, as an individual, you're experiencing microaggressions on a daily basis or quite regularly, what do you think the results are, like not just to the business, to the team, and to the person themselves as well? So we may have lost some of the slides, which we might have to take over. So we've got, just looking at the chat, and I think people are starting to send them to all attendees now, just regarding the effects of microaggressions. Someone said, I've noticed people dismissing the Black Lives Matter movement now. Questions like that disempower the person. So I don't know which part that was relating to, but just regarding microaggressions, so that sort of behaviour over time, it can really diminish a person's energy. So if they're experiencing that on a regular basis, just if anyone's got any sort of responses of how they feel that it might make people feel, then do add them in chat. But some of our suggestions, we're having a few problems with the slides, but some of our suggestions are disenfranchised from disengagement from the organisation, low battery and energy, the feeling excluded, and exhaustion again, and the feeling of othering. So I don't know if you've heard of the term othering. Essentially, it's the effects are you feel ostracized, but from like sort of the main group people within your team. And it can lead to the longer term effects are low self-esteem and even fear for safety. And I don't know if people have heard of imposter syndrome as well. It can make people sort of, but yeah, look, we're going to, I think we're having trouble with the slides, but yeah, please do look that up. What I'm interested in though, as an ally and as a person, actually as anyone in the organization, I'd like to go back over to our panelists and just ask, how do you think we should tackle microaggressions? So, you know, should it be our responsibility, and how do we feel we should tackle them? Ileana, if I come to you.
I've already spoken about it, so I'll be a bit brief, but first and foremost, we've had to educate people what microaggressions are. So just like you had that picture, we created a picture and put all different statements. I just don't think people recognize, and it's unintentional, right? It is unintentional, but I don't think people recognize the impact it has, to your point. You know, it does bring people down over and over, being asked the same thing, or self-esteem. So again, and that's why I wrote the blog, to bring it to the forefront. People have to start thinking about what they're saying, how they're saying it, how they're interacting with individuals. It's about education as well, and talking about it. And one of the, I spoke to you about it, Sarah, earlier. One of the responses that we had gotten was that someone actually wrote that they don't see it as microaggressions or aggressive. They see it as constructive, you know, development helps them. And 2 or 3 individuals came back on the chat and nicely, right? In a very nice way, which is very, very important. But basically saying there is a difference. You can have constructive criticism when you're trying to help a person and coach them. But a microaggression is not constructive criticism. It is far from it. And people need to recognize that. So again, it's education, it's being an ally, it's calling it out, it's talking about it. It's also, what we're doing is changing our language. So there's certain things that are very historical, systemic, generational words in our vocabulary that actually, if you think about them, they should be taken away. So from a marketing point of view, we're also doing a whole review of all the words and the way we present certain things, just to be more sensitive and smart, and because that's a part of microaggressions as well. So I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. And Abby, have you got anything to add to that? How would you expect people to deal with, now we're all trying to understand around what actually constitutes microaggressions? What sort of advice would you give?
I think it's the big thing that Ileana said. Think before you speak is what you do across everything. So do that here. Think before you speak. Say, patronizing comments. Oh my gosh, I can't believe. Oh, so you guys speak. So you guys speak English in Africa. Very very silly comments like that. Oh my gosh, I don't understand what you're saying, and I'm like, I'm speaking English. I'm not quite sure what you don't understand. Oh, your accent is very strong. I really can't make out what you're saying. But then other accents, somehow you easily make those out. Very silly things that people say that, and in some cases it might seem unintentional. It might seem, oh, I'm doing this because I don't quite know. But if you're not going to address other people that way, then you know already that what you're doing is wrong. You know already that that's not the best way to approach it. And if in some cases, if you don't know what to say, then just keep quiet. You don't have to have a view. You don't have to provide a very unconstructive view because you feel the need to speak. And I think in some cases that's it. Or I feel the need to express an opinion here. I feel the need to say something. And it's very interesting that someone came on and said, oh, I don't see that as microaggression. I see that as constructive criticism. But then it's only directed as a certain group of people, not everybody that you manage, not everybody that you have a relationship with, not everybody that you work with. It's only a certain group of people that you don't quite understand how they speak. It's only a certain group of people that you don't think that the way their hair is put together quite works for an office environment. It's only a certain kind of all those types of very simple things. They sound like very subtle things, but those are the very very silly things that constitute microaggression. Those are the very things that you can step away from. Those are the very things that you can stop doing. So tackling it is educating. Tackling it is helping people understand what things fall out of that space and how they can deal with it. But the big thing is thinking before you speak. Think about it. If you don't want to be treated in a disrespectful way, then why do that to someone else?
I totally agree. It's really, and it's really important. It's just understanding that how that can affect you. For instance, if not saying someone's name because you can't pronounce it every day. People have learned how to pronounce Tchaikovsky, for instance, and so you can take the time to sort of learn to pronounce someone's name rather than just not using their name at all.
Exactly.
Things like that. But also, I'm just interested. There's a lot of examples in the toolkit of different types of microaggressions and the most common ones, and how to deal with them. But I'm just wondering as well how, if you sort of saw other people, what tips would you give if there was other people? How would you interrupt that behaviour? Because to get the best results around sort of, because we said about calling out and stuff like that, but sometimes that can be quite sensitive. So what advice would you give people on this call around how, if they saw something that was maybe a repetitive microaggression within their team, and they were maybe in a position of power like a manager, what sort of advice would you give them around dealing with it with the best outcomes? Ileana, it's a bit tough one.
It's a very good question. The point is not to embarrass anyone, right? So if it's someone who's repeatedly doing it, I would absolutely have a discussion with them, a very frank discussion of the way I viewed it, and try to make them understand from the other person's point of view. And then depending on how serious it is, I would actually ask them to give the individual a call, or in some way, if it's too awkward, in some way make a gesture to apologize if it's really that bad. It just depends. If something is very serious, then as a manager, it's my obligation to go to HR. And then work with HR to decide how we actually deal with the situation. especially if it's quite serious, and we need to take those things seriously. And the other thing, we do have in the organization is the ethics hotline, which I have used when I've seen bullying happening. I've actually called, and it's a third party, so it's a good way, and it has to be addressed. It goes right to HR. So there's different vehicles for people to express it. But if I were to see it, either I would have the conversation, or I would actually get HR involved. And if it's something that I really think needs further attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. It comes back to as well, like, you can't, that's why we need allies, because it can't be down to, basically, especially if like looking at the privilege thing and then people in positions of power,
Yeah.
It can't be just down to the individual who's suffering from and being on the receiving
Yeah.
end of these microaggressions to be expected to resolve the problem.
Yeah.
So Abby, I just wondered if you've got any additional tips to add on to that.
No, I think Ileana said most of it. It's educating and understanding, and then the opportunity to teach it. Again, it's not about embarrassing anybody or making anyone look bad or kind of having a go at someone. It's looking for a way to educate and teach them so that they know not to act in that way the next time, and they can learn and change from that. But yes, if it is very serious, then put it through the right forum and put it through the right process. I don't think it should be a case of because and again, the other thing is, even if irrespective of who that person is, because in some cases
Right.
it's if it's a peer of mine, I would report, but if it's a manager I won't, if it's a managing director I won't, but if it's this I won't, and whoever it is. Because at the end of the day, you not doing that is you not doing it for across that whole diversity group, be whoever it is. It doesn't matter if it's a peer or a manager. If they've done something very, very bad and something that is more than talking to them, then put it through the right processes, so that way whoever else that might suffer because of that thinking doesn't have to deal with that. And sometimes people are very narrow-minded when they think about this. They think, oh, it's just this person having a go at me. No, more often than not, it's that person, displaying that thinking across everything that they do and everything that they are. And as we keep saying about the allyship, it's not about doing one thing or being something. It's about you adopting a way of living that applies across everything that you do. It apply, not getting too personal.
Learning a lot of behaviors and
Yeah, it's what you do with it's how you would speak to your family. If a kid of yours came in and said, oh, I said X, Y, and Z to a black person, or if you don't feel that that's a bad thing, you wouldn't correct them and say that that was not the way to act. That's the way you would take it. If something happened on the street that you thought, oh, this is not a great thing to happen, you taking an action or you doing anything or getting involved in it as you can do has a lot to do with what you think or what you feel towards that group, what you feel towards that person. So it's a way to live. It's a way to think, okay, you know what, let me think before I speak. And the main thing that I think across the board, especially when we talk about financial services, the main thing that needs to happen is it needs to be a top-down approach. It needs to be something that everybody at the top is thinking about tweaking, so that way it flows all the way down to the bottom.
That's fantastic. And so just moving on to the next slide. Sorry, because I'm quick poll for you, just to make sure you're still there, like still attentive. I'm sure you are, because there's been some really great advice on this. Do you think everyone should be an ally? Again, please do put your comments in chat. If we end the poll now, we've actually got quite a resounding yes. We've got 70% say yes, 9% say no, and 21% say maybe. It'd be good to actually hear some comments on that. But in the meantime, we have got a little bit of time for a couple of questions. So please do ask any questions to our panel. We have got one question in there at the moment. The question is, just put you on the spot. You speak about engagement at C-suite. How do you engage with people just outside this level who think that the creation of a more diverse board as a direct blocker to them joining the board? I think that means essentially how do we engage the people just below? I think that's right, just below C-suite, because we've got, and the middle as well, because we've got kind of buy-in at the top for some organizations, and we've got the CEO sort of saying, yeah, this is imperative. How do we engage those people who might not filter down to next? Actually, Abby, do you want to start with this, and then we're...
Sure, and it's not just the case, again, it's not just a case of looking at the ground floor and looking at the top level, it's looking through the companies, but it helps to start from the top as well. But outside of the C-suite, is if the C-suite are very committed to what they've decided to do, then they will make sure that it flows through right down to the ground floor, wherever that might be. So it's a case of making sure that in your manager's performance, for example, you explore what they're doing around D&I. It's a case of looking at, so it's not just what the C-suite is saying that we now have 10% of people in the company. We now have 10% of the company. 10% of our employees show our diversity because they are either LGBTA, they're ethnic minorities, they're disability, veterinarians, any of those stuff. It's making sure that the middle managers are also being judged on their performance, or their performance is being assessed based on their diversity and inclusion. Because a lot of times what happens when you don't do that is people say, oh, it's fine, no one's going to care about whether I do it or not, because it doesn't affect how much I get paid, it doesn't affect if I get promoted, it doesn't affect if anything else that I do. So it's making sure that that is reflected in their performance, and it's taken as seriously as everything else that determines their ability to move through the company. Yeah, and when you do it that way, a lot more people will get involved, a lot more people would recognize that this is important, and that's why that needs to be a top-down decision, a top-down flow in terms of changing things and making things move.
And Ileana, how do you think, like, sort of, you know, we've all on this call, but how do you feel we get that message out, you know, not just to the C-suite, but how do we get that message out, you know, to actually engage allies? You know, what are the first things we can all do?
Yeah, so it has to be top down because they set the messaging. But then you have to make sure, it gets back to what we started with in the beginning, the execution. So you have to make sure it doesn't get lost in translation, manager to manager to manager, especially if you're in big organizations of 50,000 plus people, right? How do you ensure that that is not getting lost? So there has to be an infrastructure, there has to be an investment that ensures that all of the managers are actually applying it, that they're applying to the culture and what we want to support. And it does have to be part of the performance and the end of year incentive compensation. That's the only way you're going to hit people, right? So the performance appraisal, we used to have a question in our performance appraisal where, were you involved in any diversity group or everything? And people we used to ticket just because they attended a session. And this is not about just attending a session and having a drink, right? This is much more serious. And we're looking at how do we change that? How do we make people and managers more accountable? And secondly, I think if you create a culture where people feel that it is an open, safe atmosphere, and you have people that are actually bringing that forward out to the open and having the discussions, then there's going to be no room for managers that actually don't do it. They'll be called out.
Yeah, that's really useful. We've only got 1 more minute left, so we've just got enough time to say a really big thank you to our speakers today, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, it's really some really great points there. Just in case you want to learn more and you need more information on it, do get in touch with us. We are doing a lot around this topic area at the moment, around programs, but also if you feel that there's any resources out there that we should add to the toolkit as well, please do let us know. But you can find more about the toolkit at www.investinginethnicity.com/ethnicity-allies, or you can contact Margaret as well, margaret@spmgroup.co.uk. Most of you probably have spoken to at some point. All that's left to do is say thank you, and hopefully we can
Thank you very much, everyone. It was
Thank
lovely
you.
talking to you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.